Speaker, the President of the United States.
We're taking a look at President Barack Obama a little less than 24 hours ago, preparing to deliver his annual address to Congress. He drew cheers from his party, the Democrats, when he talked about the need to lift the U.S. embargo of Cuba. But the Republicans don't see it the same way. And that's important because the Republicans are in control of Congress, and Congress is needed to lift the embargo. So Washington and Havana are pressing forward. For the first time in more than 3 decades, high-level talks are underway between the U.S. and Cuba. But just how closely are the Cuban people watching this? And are the Cubans and Americans seeing eye to eye? CCTV's Michael Voss is live in Havana for us. And Michael, what do we know about the talks so far?
Elaine, a lot of positives are coming out of these meetings, with both sides talking about constructive, positive collaboration. But there have been a number of important unresolved issues, and more are likely to follow on Thursday. It does appear, though, that both sides have agreed to disagree through diplomacy and dialogue rather than confrontation. This is the highest level U.S. negotiating team to visit Cuba in 35 years. Both sides are looking to restore diplomatic relations and reopen their embassies for the first time in more than half a century. Wednesday's talks were on migration issues, something the two sides meet to discuss every 6 months. What they showed was just how many serious, outstanding issues are left to resolve. Every year, the American consulate in Havana, which could soon be part of an embassy, issues about 20,000 visas for Cubans to emigrate to the U.S. But there's also a U.S. law known as wet foot, dry foot, which says that any Cuban who can reach the U.S. illegally will be fast-tracked into permanent residency. The Cubans regularly complain that this encourages illegal migration and people smuggling, and it was a key complaint at these talks.
Only one nationality in the world receives this preferential treatment, and it leads to irregular and illegal movements of people between Cuba and the United States. It's in nobody's interest.
The U.S. position, though, is that there are no plans to repeal the law or change the policy.
My government is completely committed to upholding the Cuban Adjustment Act. That the sets of migration-related policies that are colloquially known as wet foot, dry foot very much remain in effect.
Issues like the continued U.S. trade embargo and Cuba's one-party political system are likely to be part of Thursday's discussions. The U.S. broke off diplomatic relations in 1961 after Fidel Castro nationalized U.S. businesses without compensation and turned Cuba into the only communist country in the Americas. Washington then backed a failed invasion by Cuban exiles at the Bay of Pigs, while Cuba allowed the Soviet Union to place nuclear missiles on the island and later sent troops to fight in Africa. These days, instead of soldiers, it's Cuban medical brigades helping to fight Ebola there. In his State of the Union address on Tuesday night, U.S. President Barack Obama spoke of the benefits he hopes to achieve in restoring diplomatic relations.
And our shift in Cuba policy has the potential to end a legacy of mistrust in our hemisphere. It removes a phony excuse for restrictions in Cuba, stands up for democratic values, and extends the hand of friendship to the Cuban people.
No one is expecting the issue of reopening the embassies to be resolved this week, but it does appear that both sides are determined to move ahead as quickly as possible. It's not a matter of normalization of relations, one senior Cuban official said. It's about restoring diplomatic relations. Normalization will take much longer. Elaine.
Michael, these talks are going to continue into Thursday. What would it take to be seen for these to be seen as successful, or are they simply a success because they're happening?
No, I think it is more that they do want an outcome from this. It's not just that the talks are happening. What's happening is that the Americans have a short list of things they say they need if they're to reopen an embassy. They want to have freedom to travel around, anywhere around Cuba. Just like Cuban diplomats cannot leave Washington, they want to have an unlimited number of diplomats, no restrictions there on how many people they have. The Cubans, for their part, want to have a bank account. They haven't been able, the Cuban diplomats in interest section in Washington, no American bank has been prepared to do business with it for the last year. So these are the sorts of issues that are going to be resolved. From the Cuban perspective, they are worried that the U.S. might use this greater access to travel and more diplomats to actually go around the country supporting and encouraging opposition groups and dissidents in an attempt to change the socialist system here. But I think both sides are very keen to make progress on this. And I think, although it won't happen tomorrow, it's likely that within the next months, you will see a restoration of diplomatic relations and embassies being opened.
All right, CCTV's Michael Voss live for us in Havana.